What is hydrocephalus? As you can split this word, hydro means water, cephal head. So water in the head. This is what the meaning literally means. So it is nothing but the dilatation of the cerebral ventricles caused by a discrepancy between CSF production and absorption. Usually, normally, there is a balance between the CSF production and absorption. When there is an imbalance between any of these, there can be accumulation of CSF in the cerebral ventricles causing dilatation. This results in hydrocephalus. The incidence, it is seen in 3 to 4 per thousand live births, and among them congenital hydrocephalus carries 1/3 of the congenital malformations of the nervous system. Coming on to the circulation of CSF. CSF or cerebrospinal fluid, it is a clear colorless fluid. About 100 to 150 ml is produced at a rate of 20 ml per hour, and per day around 500 ml is being produced. When a patient is in a supine position, lying straight, the CSF pressure is normally 100 to 120 millimeter of water. CSF production is mainly it is produced in the choroid plexus, the ependymal surface. Ependymal surface are nothing but they are a neuroglial or they are epithelial lining of the ventricular surfaces. They are made up of specialized neuroepithelial cells. So the ependymal surface, the choroid plexus, and the brain tissue or the brain parenchyma produces CSF. CSF is being absorbed by the arachnoid villus, which is the middle layer, the brain capillaries, the choroid plexus also absorbs, the lymphatic system and the nerve root. Hydrocephalus can be classified into two types, non-communicating and communicating hydrocephalus. What is non-communicating hydrocephalus? Non-communicating is a blockage of CSF pathway at or proximal to the outlet foramina of the fourth ventricle. This I will be explaining when I tell the CSF pathway or CSF flow. So basically, non-communicating is when there is a blockage of CSF pathway below the third ventricle, you call it as non-communicating. Communicating is if there is any problem, any obstruction in the subarachnoid space, then you call it as communicating. As you can see in this picture, the CSF flows through the lateral ventricles and then it goes down to the third ventricle through the foramen of Monro. That is the duct through which the CSF flows, and this is the picture of CSF flow. As you can see, the CSF, these are the lateral ventricles. The CSF flows through the lateral ventricles. There are two lateral ventricles. From there, it flows into the third ventricle. This is the third ventricle. From the lateral ventricle, it flows into the third ventricle through the foramen of Monro. From the third ventricle, it flows into the fourth ventricle through the foramen of Luschka and foramen of Magenta. So this duct is also called as the aqueduct of Sylvius, as you can see. So this is how the CSF flows through, and it gets absorbed into the arachnoid villi and the choroid plexus. The etiology of hydrocephalus is, number one, it could be congenital. Congenital means it is from birth. It could be as a result of aqueductal obstruction. As I previously showed you the picture, if there is any stenosis or any obstruction from birth in the aqueduct of Sylvius, then the fluid gets accumulated in the brain. Number two is atresia of the foramen of Monro. Atresia means improper development. If the foramen of Monro, that is the Foramen Monro is the one which connects the second lateral ventricles to the third ventricle. So if there is any atresia or improper development, then you can have a congenital hydrocephalus. The third malformation is called as a Dandy-Walker malformation. This is a congenital malformation which results in abnormal CSF production. Here there is a problem in the cerebellum. So the cerebellum, when the ventricles of the cerebellum are not properly developed, and they can be, this is called as Dandy-Walker malformation. Sometimes there could be a benign intracranial cyst arising, which can also block the obstruction of CSF flow. Arnold-Chiari malformation presents later in childhood, later in infancy. This is nothing but this is a structural defect in the cerebellum, which results in accumulation of CSF. And if there is any skull base anomalies, also it can result in hydrocephalus. Second cause could be neoplasms. Any neoplasms are tumors arising from the choroid plexus, which can result in imbalance in the CSF production. Medulloblastomas, these are also benign tumors which are present. Ependymomas, astrocytomas, these are all glial cells seen in the brain parenchyma. Craniopharyngiomas, which is seen tumors arising from the pituitary gland. These all can also result in hydrocephalus. The third is inflammatory. Inflammatory is nothing but any infection in the ventricles, such as any meningitis. It could be result of encephalitis or any other ventriculitis, or intraventricular hemorrhage can result in hydrocephalus. Now the next one is, the first one is congenital, the second one is overproduction of CSF as a result of tumors like choroid plexus papilloma. The pathophysiology is any of these accumulation of CSF as a result of the following etiology that we saw results in dilatation of the subarachnoid channels resulting in increased pressure in the ventricular system. The fluid gets accumulated and the pressure in the ventricular system increases, resulting in there is congestion and displacement of the cerebral arteries that are in the brain parenchyma. This also results in diminished blood supply and ischemia. The cerebral arteries get congested, compressed, resulting in ischemia. Ischemia is decreased oxygen supply to the tissues, resulting in white matter atrophy. The white matter does not develop adequately. It damages the ependymal epithelium which surrounds the ventricles, resulting in brain edema. Now the manifestations congenital hydrocephalus are obvious at birth. You can see a big head, child with a large head. This can begin in infancy or early childhood. The signs and symptoms of hydrocephalus in infants are different from toddlers and older children. In infants, the mother can typically present with a child with enlarged head, anterior fontanelle, which is seen just anteriorly to the head as you touch the soft pulsatile is the anterior fontanelle. This looks tense, bulging and non-pulsatile. There will be dilated scalp veins seen, and Macewen sign is another sign. What is Macewen sign? Macewen sign is a crack pot sound heard on percussion of the skull. This is called Macewen sign. You can see that in a child with hydrocephalus. Frontal bossing, because of the increased fluid between the ventricles, you can find the child having frontal bossing. The head will be enlarged more over the frontal side, and they will have depressed eyes because the fluid is getting accumulated. They can have depressed eyes. Sunsetting sign. Sunsetting sign is nothing but you can see the pupils the black, no, the black part of the eye, you can see just above the cornea. It will look as if it is like a sunset sign, and there'll be sluggish pupils, unequal reaction to light. In toddlers and older children, mostly they can have signs of increased ICP. Increased ICP are nothing, increased intracranial pressure. They can present with headache, vomiting, projectile vomiting, and they can be lethargic. They can have headache, papilledema. On observation through ophthalmoscope, you can see papillary edema. Strabismus. Strabismus is, you can see that the eye movement is not correct. You will find that one eye is to squint. It is otherwise called squint. Ataxia. They can be imbalanced gait and cranial nerve palsies. Sometimes in infants they can be highly irritable. Some small babies can have a shrill cry. They can have poor feeding. Opisthotonous position, where there will be a lumbar curvature with the head touching the back. An altered level of consciousness. They will be extremely irritable or lethargic. They can have poor head control. They can have lower extremity spasticity, seizures, and some children can also have bradycardia with cardiac arrest. In toddlers, they also can be irritable, lethargic, apathetic, confused, and often they will be irrelevant in their speech with seizures and cardiac arrest. Next, we'll go on to the diagnosis. The imaging studies are the studies that can be done are CT scan, MRI, ultrasonogram. CT scan and MRI helps in identifying the problem, whether there's any intracranial hemorrhage or any tumor, whether there's any brain edema. The cause can be identified, or any trauma, any bleeding. And if the ultrasound also helps in that. Other evaluation or other tests are, we can do a lumbar puncture to rule out any infection, neurophysiological evaluation such as neurosonogram, fundus examination to look for papilledema. So this is how you can see the MRI, and this is a CT which shows the inflammation of, there is a cerebral edema as you can see in this picture. Medical management for hydrocephalus is, number one is removal of CSF. You can do serial LPs, therapeutic lumbar punctures, where you can remove the excess fluid being accumulated, or there is also a procedure called the second one is by decreasing the CSF production through drugs. The first drug is acetazolamide, which is given at 50 to 100 mg per kg, and furosemide, which is 1 mg per kg, otherwise called Lasix. These two drugs reduce the secretion of CSF from the choroid plexus. Next one is those drugs which decrease the water content. So there is a drug called mannitol, which is a osmotic diuretic. Other drugs are glycerol, urea, and isosorbide, but the commonly used drug is mannitol. Other nowadays frequently studies have shown that 3% saline also is another drug which helps in reducing cerebral edema, thereby reducing the intracranial pressure. The fourth one is drugs which increase the CSF absorption, like hyaluronidase, urokinase, streptokinase. Surgical management is either you can remove the obstruction. If suppose the obstruction is either if suppose there is a hematoma, you can remove the hematoma. If there is a tumor, you are trying to remove the tumor. That's the initial management. The second one is reduction in the amount of CSF produced. That we already saw how by administering drugs, or there is another procedure called as external ventricular drainage, where you're trying to externally fix a needle and you're trying to remove so wherever there is an accumulation of CSF, the needle is inserted, and through that externally the fluid is being drained out. The third procedure is shunting of CSF from the ventricles to another site. This is called ventriculoperitoneal shunt. So this is also a procedure that we will be seeing in the later slides. The extracranial shunts, as I already told, are ventriculoperitoneal shunt, ventriculoatrial shunt, lateral ventricle or lumbar subarachnoid space to a ureter, and ventriculopleural shunt. Among this, the most common shunt is a ventriculoperitoneal shunt. What is this ventriculoperitoneal shunt? As you can see in this picture, ventriculoperitoneal shunt is where, as you can see in this, there is a tube or a catheter that is inserted into the ventricles, and it passes through the neck vein, and you can see it goes into the peritoneal cavity. So here basically what we are trying to do is, shunt is nothing but just like how in a garden we try to shunt the water to different just like how in a garden we try to divert the water to different plants and trees so that they do not accumulate in a place. Just like that, we want to divert the accumulated CSF in the brain to the peritoneal cavity, which is in the abdomen, so that the fluid, the CSF, can be absorbed into the peritoneum. This is the main goal for doing this procedure. The complications after shunt surgery are malfunction. Sometimes the shunt does not function by getting obstructed. The next one is shunt infection. Sometimes if we don't milk the tube, if we don't press the tube correctly, it can get blocked. All the protein, mainly the CSF, it contains a lot of protein. If there's any infection, all these can block the shunt and cause infection. Over drainage, sometimes there can be a rapid draining of CSF from the brain. Okay, that is called over drainage. Some children can present with an increased ICP resulting in seizures. Some can present with a pneumocephalus, mild elevation of the head circumference. That is how we can identify, and an isolated ventricle syndrome. These are all other less or rare symptoms that you can see in children. Pulmonary complications and shut nephritis are also rare complications. Family support. Now this is one of the very important thing that we need to do. The reason, we need to find out the reason for hospitalization and shunting. We need to reinforce this information given by the physician. We need to explain to the family the importance of the shunt procedure and teach them how to recognize shunt malformation. Shunt malfunction can be identified by decreased drain. Number 2, increased symptoms such as increased ICP. Those symptoms will be increased. And number 3, you will find that they will be altered sensorium. So the next one that we need to teach is self-care activities. To teach the parents about taking care of the child, about self-care needs, meeting the hygienic needs, the elimination needs, giving bath or mouth care, all that has to be explained. Prevention of constipation. Constipation can increase the intracranial pressure. Therefore, we need to prevent constipation by giving high fiber-rich diet, and also you can use laxatives if there is chronic constipation. Bigger children, you can restrict sports because that again will aggravate the intracranial pressure. And school precautions such as you have to teach them about stress management. You need to tell them about the symptoms of increased ICP and explain to the school teacher also. Prognosis, and if it is untreated, 50 to 60% mortality rate, and there is a large number of disabling neurological deficits. These children can have deficits where some children can have paralysis, some can have amnesia, memory loss. All these, if they are treated, there is 90% survival rate, and there is a possibility of a normal life. Thank you.